You and my father's hand, not mine.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Eric and Arryk, and let's talk about Hot D Episode 2. This show is pretty great, and that Eric versus Arryk fight was top-tier Game of Thrones. But I'm wondering if the show made a crucial mistake in Season 1 that it's now trying to backtrack on a bit. Are the Greens just too damn evil? You may have noticed that this episode is suddenly trying to make the Greens more sympathetic, but I'm wondering if it's too late. A little later, I'm actually going to be joined by Brianna, McLarty, and Darren Robinson to get their thoughts on this episode, but first, here's my take. This show is very biased towards the blacks being the good guys and the greens being the bad guys. But when you read the book Fire and Blood, you can't really tell who to root for. It's all third-hand accounts interpreted by a maester. So in the book, we're seeing history's perceptions of these rulers. Even the various first-hand accounts are kind of biased and often digress into talking about sizes of genitalia.
Wait, really?
Yes, really. But the show is giving us our first true first-hand account. We're able to see that all of these lords and soldiers who are shaping the fate of the kingdoms are actually just sad, broken people. But Season 1 made the Greens out to be the clear-cut villains of the story. Otto conspires to usurp the throne. He pushes his 15-year-old daughter into marrying an old, rotting man. Alicent lives her whole life resenting this, which in turn means that she resents her kids. I mean, if this is a show about mothers, then Alicent is the terrible mother.
Why, what is it today?
She can't even comfort Helena when her grandchild has died. Instead of raising her children or loving them, she turns the kids into proxies in her resentment war against Rhaenyra. While Aegon was overlooked by his father, so he was not raised to be a leader, and instead he became a predatory pervert.
You see now what he is.
Aemond is cruel and Helena is ignored, even though she could predict the damn future and no one ever even seems to notice. And hell, Alicent's youngest, Daeron, has lived away from her in Old Town for so long that he's not even in the darn show. And before I go any farther, guys, I want to show you these brand new Eric and Arryk pointing meme shirts that we designed at our merch store, and we also have our Team Green and Team Black baseball tees. Guys, we love designing these shirts for you, and shopping our merch store helps us make more videos like this one. The links are below. So, while Alicent is shown as a cruel and distant mother, Rhaenyra is always seen as a kind and caring mother. Her children were born out of love and passion, while Alicent's were born out of resentment and duty. So, this season is trying to balance the scales a little, to show how the Greens can be more sympathetic and the blacks leaning a little bit more toward villainy. See, so far this season, Aegon is portrayed as a well-meaning moron who's basically up for a good time. He thinks being the king is fun because no one ever taught him how to rule. He also loves his kid, and he is simply trying to give him the attention that, well, he never received from his own dad.
Because I think he wants a ride.
Your Grace.
A ride?
A pony ride.
And we also see Aemond humanized in a moment of vulnerability where he is nude and curled up in a fetal position, seeking motherly affection from a sex worker. Now, we want to hate this guy, but here we see that he's inside just a broken little boy. Even Otto backtracks when he realizes that Viserys was a better king than he thought, and that he was the one who made an error in judgment by crowning Aegon.
He was right about you.
But at this point, I really pity Alicent. This is a woman who has done everything anyone ever asked her to do. She wanted to be free, like Rhaenyra, but she wasn't fortunate enough to be born a princess. After her husband died, she finally found some sexual happiness, but then she believes that she is immediately being punished simply for indulging herself.
The gods punish us. They punish me.
So many of the Greens are now being shown in a sympathetic light, except for Criston Cole. That guy, still a major head, but I'll let Brianna talk about him a little bit later. So, while the Greens are getting more sympathetic, the blacks are becoming less sympathetic. Later in the book, Rhaenyra gets very paranoid, and we can kind of see the groundwork for that being laid this episode, with her not trusting Daemon or Massaria. And Daemon was incredibly sympathetic when he crowned the queen or handed Viserys his crown, but now he's going back to being the bad boy of the realm.
I cannot be responsible for a
Cannot be
mistake.
responsible.
But look, I love all this. The show reminds me of early Game of Thrones episodes where the villains and the heroes all had more nuance. Just like in the original show, these characters work best when we don't see them in pure shades of black and white. For instance, later seasons of the series gave us more and more fan service. Tyrion remained just and good, whereas in the books he's starting to drift a little more toward becoming a bitter, hateful person. Game of Thrones was fundamentally a series about how power will eventually corrupt absolutely, and it showed how the people seeking power were flawed, arrogant human beings. scenes. Now, in later seasons, I think the show lost a lot of that nuance in favor of narratives like Tyrion is always good and Dragon Lady bad now. So in this show, I do want the Greens to be as sympathetic as possible. I want these two sides to go into battle, and I want to be rooting for neither of them. The story in the book is a tragedy. It is the fall of House Targaryen. We should want to see both sides win and neither side win. I mean, this would be a feat unmatched in television history if they can manage to avoid making one side too good or too evil. So that's just my thoughts, but I am so lucky to be joined by two guests. We have Darren Robinson from the Second City and our very own Brianna McLarty. Thank you guys both very much for coming on. Darren, you're new to the program. You are a comedy veteran from Second City and The Onion, but you're also a George R.R. Martin scholar. So I want to get your thoughts. What did you think about this episode 2 of Hot D?
Well, first of all, the beginning of it, thanks for having me, by the way. The beginning of it was so just jarring. Just the first shot of it, the maid coming out with the blood-stained sheet and just chaos happening in the Red Keep in the castle. And I really felt like this episode really showed how Aemond and Daemon are twin flames, and that we're seeing that we have these parallel characters on both sides of the different councils. On the Greens, you know, we have Aemond as the aggressor. On the Blacks, we have Daemon. On the Greens, we have Otto as kind of the old head. He's kind of the wise older guy who's like, no, let's be cautious. And on the Blacks, we have Rhaenys, who's really the one showing some restraint here. On the Blacks, we have Mysaria as our mistress of whisperers. And on the Greens, we have Loras Strong, who's also kind of our master of whispers. So we're really putting all the chess pieces on the board on both sides and seeing like who's the knight, who's the bishop, who's the rook, and how this is all going to play out later on down the line. Yeah, and the show itself, like ever since season 1, has had that theme of duality, as it should, because it's about the Targaryen house being split in two. Brianna, you even picked up a great detail in the first episode. You wrote our breakdown for episode 1 and 2. In our second episode breakdown, you pointed out that Aegon's shirt, when he finds out about his son being, well, severed, actually, he's also cut into two pieces. His shirt is divided in two, just like the House of the Dragon. And I think there's little details like that all the way through the series. Like the show is more obsessed with duality than The Acolyte. Brianna, what are your, these shows are starting to blend together for me too. Brianna, what were your thoughts on episode 2?
I loved episode 2. I thought last episode specifically, it was kind of a slow burn and then you just had blood and cheese. And then I really loved how they just picked up and it was really intense. My favorite thing about this episode was that you saw just how emotionally disconnected the Greens are. That they are a unit, but they are completely separate. They can't go to each other for any type of emotional support or comfort, even in a time where, you know, a child has just died. And I think it really showed the difference between them and Rhaenyra, because when Lucerys died, Rhaenyra immediately goes to comfort Jacaerys, like the second he gets home. So I really enjoyed seeing that duality, because I think it really shows the difference between sort of the duty-based family, that is the Greens, and the actual love-based family that is less maybe smart politically, but they actually care about each other.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, you know, the difference between Rhaenyra and Alicent's parents is Alicent's children were born out of duty and resentment, whereas, you know, Rhaenyra's were born out of passion and love. Brianna, can you remind me, what's your social handle? Where can people find you if they want to find out more about your thoughts on Hot D?
I am Brianna T. McLarty on Instagram and on TikTok and on Threads, but I don't use it that much.
Yeah, nobody's using Threads that much. We may get there someday. Who knows? Darren, how about you? I forgot to ask you earlier.
Yes, you can find me at Darren_to dream. It's very corny. I came up with it when I was 17, but people remember it.
I love it.
I can't believe Twitter existed when you were 17. I feel ancient compared to you two. So speaking of duality, Darren, the ending, right? I don't think, you know, this is also present, I think, in the text Fire and Blood. The twins are there and this theme of duality was there. And like you said, Aemond and Daemon are clearly mirror images of each other. You know, no spoilers from the book, but they're also second sons who both like lust for power. But then we have that ending that takes that theme, right? And I feel like up till now, you used the chess metaphor earlier. Up till now, we've had some pawns moving across the board. We had like a little sideways attack of a pawn taking a pawn with blood and cheese. But this was our first like knight versus knight move in chess. What if the whole channel became chess obsessed from this point on? We had our first knight versus knight with Sir Eric and Sir
Arryk?
Arryk?
Arryk and Arryk?
My
So
accent.
rude.
I'm
They're
from
already
Southern
all bananagrams. They're already all bananagrams. And now you give us Sir Eric and Arryk. Like, that's mean.
I'm from Southern Ohio. So for me, I'm surprised I can make Rhaenys and Rhaenyra sound different. So we have that first blood strike between two identical twins who are so alike they can't even be told apart. And I just want to get your thoughts on that fight itself. And like, have we ever seen a fight in Game of Thrones television like that before that was so ugly and brutal? I can think of one that maybe comes to mind.
I mean, I'm thinking about Oberyn's death, the Mountain versus the Viper. I mean, exploding heads, yikes, head popping. Haven't seen that since The Boys. But you know, that was like a crazy. This was really a crazy battle to me, especially because I had to rewind it a couple times and watch it and be like, wait a minute, who's who now? Because they look so much alike and they're moving around, so you really can't tell. And then at the end, one kills the other one and then kills himself by his own sword. And he apologizes to Rhaenyra. And I'm almost like, is this Rhaenyra's guard who's apologizing to her, or is this Aegon's guy apologizing to Rhaenyra? Like, it really, because you really can't tell at the end. And in the book, Fire and Blood, there's also some side lore about how the two brothers at the beginning of the war wrote a song or sang a song to each other, or a mummer wrote a song about the two brothers saying like, this is my side of the story. This is my side of the story. Why can't we be friends? You know, Smash Mouth, why can't we be friends? Kind of in that way. But it is really tragic. And like all civil wars, I mean, the American Civil War, you had brothers in the Union and brothers in the Confederacy fighting and killing each other. So it's very dramatic.
You know, I never even tried to see who was who because my thought was it doesn't matter at that point. And I thought even if it was Aegon's Eric, and I don't care how you're supposed to pronounce it, they're Eric and Arryk. Even if it was Aegon's Eric who killed himself, he just committed the sin of kinslaying. Yeah. So to him, it would just be, you know, either way, he would not be worthy of wearing the white cloak anymore. The Viper and the Mountain is a great example, but I always thought of that one as a dance. There's music in it right up until Oberyn, you know, just can't shut the hell up.
Well, the Hound, though, the Hound and the Mountain is also interesting at the end because they're two brothers fighting each other.
Yeah, but that one for me was always so operatic, and it was so over the top. As far as this was a street fight. This was like the end of Rocky V or They Live. I thought Brienne versus the Hound was very close to this, where it's just like, I don't want either of you to lose. And that's what, like I was saying earlier, that's what this show really needs, is to make us feel like we don't want either side to win or lose. But I don't know how well it's striking that balance at this point. Brianna, what about you? Like, we have these Team Black, Team Green t-shirts for sale, but I can't imagine anybody buying a Team Green shirt. Where are you at on this? Are they imbalancing the show too much?
I definitely feel like it's difficult to root for Team Green. I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing, because I think Team Green represents a lot of the like worst parts we see of Game of Thrones, like the sexism and just the absolute power of one man in charge and how that can go completely awry. I think one thing I wish they would just focus on more. I really don't like that they made Alicent sleep with Sir Criston Cole, because I just think it does make her so much less sympathetic. Like, I know
I know we talked about this last week, but I was so happy for her. I felt like she backslid this episode.
I'm so sorry.
I don't want to cut you off. I'm sorry, but like,
I was like, you started the war.
I'm glad she's experiencing good sex finally. Good for her.
First time in her life. She spent her entire like sexual years, her 20s, underneath a corpse. Like a man with pieces falling off of him. Like, I was really happy for her, even though, like, frankly, she could do a lot better, even as a Dowager Queen. Sorry, Brianna, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I do. It's weird. I'm of two minds where I am like, okay, yay, she got something. But then on the other hand, I am like, dude, remember how you like multiple times got really angry that Rhaenyra's kids were bastards and even tried to like take away the Driftmark throne from them like not that long ago, and low-key kind of helped start a war because you were so mad that Rhaenyra slept with Sir Criston Cole.
Yeah. And like I was going to ask you, speaking of Sir Criston Cole, he seems to be the only character here who they are not trying to give him. They're trying to double down on him being a terrible, embarrassed little boy. What are your thoughts on him at this point?
I don't like that man. I'm so sorry. I really don't like him. I do think I like seeing him this time get so defensive and sort of try to deflect from all the mistakes he made. I thought the white cloak, where he gets so angry about the white cloak being like sullied, even though like that's only a metaphor. And it's a metaphor for the honor that he's already sullied. I really enjoy how they're doing that. I just can't like him. He's so difficult to be sympathetic towards, especially when he still hates Rhaenyra for sleeping with him when he is now sleeping with the next queen. Mm-hmm. But I think he's going to be really interesting as Hand. I wrote in my video that I think that's a really stupid decision, like from a tactical, not in the show,
incredibly stupid.
Tactical, yeah. He knows nothing. Right. Also, he just gotta like he didn't protect the kid. He did not protect the kids. Like, that is the biggest fail.
His one job, yeah. And you're right. You said this in the video as well, that he just constantly deflects all of his failures onto other people. And just so we get it straight, he was not mad at Rhaenyra for sleeping with him. He's mad at Rhaenyra for rejecting him, for basically saying, well, no, I have a position of power and you do not. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to, like you said, the Team Greens are basically driven by sexism, right? And tradition, where the fact that Criston Cole is now being forced in a role where he is eternally subservient to a sexual partner was more than his ego could handle. Darren, what about you? Do you think that, is there anyone on Team Green at this point that you're looking at and going, actually really feel for that person?
Aegon. I feel for him. Yeah, I do, because
Aegon, who went to the child fighting pits for fun?
Okay, because he's hurt people. I think that he really, I think he really redeemed himself in episode 1. And Brianna, you mentioned this in the last video, just how he was like, oh, let's give them the livestock back, like who he even very cute. I think he whispers, he's like, who's gonna know if we give it to them? He really is trying his best. He's someone who's just woefully incompetent because he was not trained by his father. He didn't get the attention of his father. And so he's really trying to make up for that now. And he's a little Nepo baby who, didn't go to the right school and really doesn't know what he's doing and is trying his best at a job that he's maybe not really fit for. And I think he's someone who, had he had some more guidance from his father, had he not been thrust into this war, because he really is the pawn, because it's really like Otto and Alicent's war, and they were using him because he's the conduit to power. But if he wasn't put in this position, I feel like he would end up being like a much better guy. I think he'd be okay just being a country lord. And like Lena was saying in season 1, he'd be okay being a country lord, just getting fat and growing old in the countryside. I think he'd be okay with that. So I really feel for him.
Like his dad.
Like his dad, exactly. I think he's more like Viserys, I think, than Rhaenyra even is.
Yeah, and this great scene in season 1 specifically when Alicent's like, if you're gonna be king, and if you try to challenge Rhaenyra, she's gonna kill you. And he's like, then I won't challenge her. I won't challenge Rhaenyra.
When he's a teenager, right? When he still looks like Finn Wolford and she's slapping him. Yeah. I thought that his brilliant turn, and it's so rare in any show where you can see one scene that turns a character, right? And this show's given us a few of them. I think one scene for sure with Criston Cole was when Rhaenyra shuts him down, right? He never recovers from that. That's like his Waterloo. Mm-hmm. With Aegon, his turning scene was his coronation. And it was done so well. On a dime, he digs the crowds. He digs the attention because, like you just said, Darren, he's getting attention for the first time in his life. And I think Otto made the mistake of thinking he's a pawn when really Aegon's more of a rook. He's just somebody who can charge forward or charge that way and has no nuance to him whatsoever. I did think, and Brianna, you did write about this in our episode 1 video, I did think that him saying, well, let's give him some sheep, had nothing to do with him feeling sympathy toward them for sheep. It just had to do with him wanting to be liked, which again speaks to a vulnerability. What about you? Go ahead, Brianna.
Sorry. I think both things can be true. I definitely think, well, he's not as just awful as someone like Joffrey. He does not enjoy watching others suffer for fun. Yeah. He's clearly hell-bent on revenge right now because, to be frank, that is, like, I can't even blame him that badly for, like, beating the guy with the mace because he just watched his little kid's head come back in a bag.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So he's really hell-bent on revenge, but he doesn't seem to just be completely sadistic, at least with all the small folk. I am interested to see how I don't want to get us banned on YouTube, but like reconcile that with some of the more bad actions he took in season 1, specifically kind of like the essay. He did, and I feel like they just kind of dropped that. They were like, oh yeah, remember how he, essayed people? Let's forget about it. So...
I also think though part of that might be because he just was no one had any eyes on him. So he's just acting out because he doesn't know what's right. And he's given this privilege, but he's not given any guidance with that privilege. Mm-hmm. No one cares enough about him when he's a kid to tell him not to do things. So he just does them. And I think good parents are ones who discipline their kids and who tell them right from wrong. And he didn't get that. And so that's going to have crazy consequences for him as an adult now.
Or just to say, I love you. I mean, that's the other thing too, is you saw this emotional distance that Alicent has with Helena that we haven't seen her interact much with her daughter, but we did see her interact with her sons and it wasn't affectionate. This was flat out like she can't even cope with her own grief. And by the way, the loss of a child, one of the worst things a family could ever go through. And it is completely normal for family members to retreat within themselves during that time. So I'm not necessarily saying she's a bad mother to her daughter, but I do think, like you said, Brianna, we see a lot of emotional distance between, or maybe it was you, Darren, I'm sorry. At the beginning of the conversation, one of you said that we see a lot of emotional distance between this family that is not present with Rhaenyra's family.
Yeah, and I actually would say I think Alicent is an actively bad mom to Helena in this episode. I think what she did to her, saying that, oh, well, I know that you just lost a kid and you don't want to be around people because people literally broke into your house. But we serve the crown, so we have to go behind your son's body with the head re-tied on and just sit there in the crowd so everyone can see you grieving to like make the crown look good. And also, we're not even going to be talking about your son while we're going through it. It's all going to be look at what Rhaenyra did. I think that is actively cruel. Like, I think it is I think the Helena we see later on in the books is going to be actually directly because of what happened to her in that not coronation, the procession, not even just what she witnessed, but I think it seems like that would be incredibly traumatizing to watch your son die and then have your grief immediately exploited.
And that
further, I think, sorry, Darren, I think that Alicent enjoys doing this to her kids because she was forced to do so much for duty that she feels like her kids owe it to her to do things for duty, whether it's be crowned or go to war, or in the case of Helena, be in that funeral procession. Sorry, Darren, I cut you off.
No, that's literally what I was going to say, is that Otto did the same thing to Alicent. Like he was like, this is your duty. You're here. The king is grieving. You're grieving. He really exploited both of their grief, and that Alicent was still grieving her mother, is still grieving her mother, because in the first episode of season 2, we see her lighting a candle. She lights one for Viserys. She lights one for Lucerys, but the first candle she lights is for, I forgot her name, something Florent, but that's her mother who passed away. Mm-hmm. And so,
I didn't catch that. That's awesome.
Yes, the first name that she says, I think the last name is Florent. It also starts with an A.
I think it's Allison, or something like that.
Alice,
again, all the anagrams.
Allery, it's Allery. She lights a candle for Allery Florent, and that is Alicent's mother. And so she's still actively grieving her mother. And Otto kind of twisted her grief and twisted Viserys's grief to make this happen. And so she's doing that to Helena now. She's using her grief to get power and get what she wants. It's a vicious cycle. Yeah.
And I do get the feeling that her mother probably wasn't even probably wasn't that caring of a mother. I'm just guessing because we don't see her knowing how to mother people. And there's one scene in season 1 where she is confronting her dad, and all he says to her is, "You look so much like your mother in certain lights." Mm-hmm. And I think that was a very cutting remark he had to remind her of her place. Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting to see, like, again, every story has to start somewhere, but with Game of Thrones, you always want to know what happened before. So earlier you mentioned Joffrey, right, Brianna? And this is where I'm curious about what you guys think about this show. Game of Thrones gave us some very clear-cut villains. Some of them were villains we just hated, who were just cruel for the sake of cruelty, like Ramsay or Joffrey. Some of them were like hot topic bad boys, like Euron Greyjoy, who were kind of fun. Others were just cartoonishly evil, like the Slavers, which, they should be cartoonishly evil. So with this show, we don't have that guy's just an out-and-out cruel villain. We didn't see Joffrey's upbringing and the emotional distance that made him into a monster, which is probably because of incest, let's be honest. With this show, do you think we need that kind of villain, somebody we can just get behind and out-and-out hate? Or do you think one of these people is going to become that villain? Whoever wants to take that question, go right ahead.
I think that we don't need that villain because I fundamentally think House of the Dragons and Game of Thrones are very different shows. I think Game of Thrones is a sweeping epic, and I think House of the Dragon is like basically a family drama with some lords and dragons. I would say House of the Dragons almost more like Succession. It's an play. Yeah, it's almost like Succession.
Yeah, it is.
So I think that we don't need that because it would take away from it. Like, you can have these really just outlandishly villainous characters in a big sweeping story because you have a lot more people that you're rooting for and a lot more storylines. I think if you're going to do like a tighter family drama, anybody getting too evil just makes it less fun to watch versus understandably evil or people you can hate but kind of understand them. For me, my villain's Kristen Cole, but that's just me.
Sure.
I disagree.
Go ahead.
For me, I think it's Larys Strong because I know that he has been passed over so many times. I mean, he himself was the second son because Harwin was the one to inherit Harrenhal before the accident, quote unquote.
Such a terrible shame what happened to that strong line, isn't it?
Smokey the Bear would be so disappointed. Smokey the Bear. But I think that he, just because you're someone who has a disability doesn't mean that you are a psychopath. Right. And I think that Larys is a psychopath. Like, he takes it so far. Even Alicent says after he pulls the accident, Alicent's like, "I didn't ask for this. This is too far. You're going too far." So I think Larys might end up being our just Black of Hearts evil villain of the show with just no redeeming qualities at all.
Which would be different. I mean, Littlefinger was that kind of villain too, but Littlefinger, I don't know, maybe it's because he was called Littlefinger, always, just, especially by the last season or second to last season, seemed a little more harmless, if that makes sense. Whereas like the violence committed by somebody, the firsthand violence and the relishing and cruelty of Joffrey and Ramsay kind of made them even more horrific in that way. I wonder if we're going to see, and again, this is no spoilers from the book, because the book, again, is very neutral in how I'm talking to the viewer. It's very neutral in how it presents people in some ways. And in some ways it is taking like what the small folk were saying. And now we're getting to see the true events behind the history. There are certain characters who maybe we'll find out their actions are more villainous than we thought. Like, Aemond is somebody, I think they're going out of their way to show his human, vulnerable side. Mm-hmm. And I could see Aemond becoming your Joffrey and your violent, horrific person who you just are like, can someone please kill this little guy?
I totally agree. I hated Aemond a lot of the first season. I really hated him with the stuff he did with Vhagar. And he was no one talks about this. This like 10-year-old was going to kill a small child. He the only reason he lost an eye was because he was like, I'm going to beat this 10-year-old's head in. So, yeah. But I do actually love what you said, Darren, about Larys. I kind of forgot about him because he's on the peripheral, but I actually completely agree. And especially this episode, we see that he's totally fine just torturing people. Yeah. And I think he likes it. So I could definitely see that. I wasn't thinking of him because that's what he wants. He wants to be in the corner.
And his dad seems like a nice guy. Like he seems like a
wise
cool
person,
dude.
too.
Very
his dad
wise.
was the only person in the kingdom who seems to actually not be looking out for himself.
Exactly. I think he was an excellent hand who died too soon. I thought his Harwin was a great guy as well, was a great father to those boys. I mean, let's call it what it is. But Laura's
Saying the quiet part out loud.
I'm saying it out loud. We all know, okay? They have black hair.
Just look at them.
Just look at them. But I just think, he doesn't, from his family background, I don't really know if he has a reason to be as sadistic as he is. So I think there's something wrong with him. There's a screw loose up there.
Definitely. And I do think maybe we'll even see, there's one character, and I want to stay away from spoilers here. There's a blacksmith that we meet in this episode named Hugh. And I believe it's Hugh Hammer from the book. This character is in the book. He is not presented in a favorable light in the book. And I'm wondering if the reason he's not presented in a favorable light is because he is one of the small folk and a commoner. And if certain decisions he makes are then used or twisted around by all the lords of Westeros and the histories. And that's one thing, again, I love about this show is we're getting like, it's better than this because you're getting the emotions behind everything. What did you guys think about that cheeky little Hugh cameo or like Alan's cameo? Do you think that we're going to start to transition into these characters and maybe some of these others kind of fall off?
I'll just say, I think they're planting some seeds, and I'll leave it at that. And people who read the book know what I mean by seeds.
If you know, you know. Yeah. I think we'll be seeing a mill somewhere. So last thing I want to talk to you guys about, apparently the first week had low viewership. Half the viewers of the premiere of season 1. I don't have the numbers in front of me for the rest of season 1. There was obviously a lot of curiosity about the new Game of Thrones show. I was surprised how well like our videos did back then. Our videos are typically like the views are a good metric of how many people watched. They had a great publicity campaign for this. Like Vagar, a physical version of Vagar was on top of the Empire State Building. They unveiled Targaryen banners on the Brooklyn Bridge. But do you think it's because viewer enthusiasm wasn't there, Darren? Were people watching the Tonys instead? Where do you think, like, are people still excited about Game of Thrones at this point?
I think that it was Father's Day. I think it was also the Tonys. Daniel Radcliffe won his first Tony Award. Harry Potter won a Tony. Okay. Like that's kind of a big deal. So, and there was a lot of stuff going on. So I think it might be that. I think it might be people just kind of waiting until it ramps up a little bit more. I mean, Blood and Cheese right out the gate with episode 1 was a crazy thing, but I think we're waiting for more of like the actual war to happen. I think the second episode was great. I loved the scene between Otto and Aegon. That was like really good, dramatic back and forth where he fires his grandpa as his hand. I think the scene between Rhaenyra and Daemon was amazing, with them confronting kind of the disparity of their marriage. And it's funny that Matt Smith is once again playing a husband who is in a subservient role to his wife, who's a queen. If anyone watched The Crown, he played Prince Philip in The Crown. We had great kind of meaty, dramatic scenes like that I think will be Emmy fodder. But I think people are waiting for more dragons. I think people are waiting for more war.
Well, no spoilers, but they are about to get them. Brianna, Darren, I want to thank both of you for joining us. Remember, guys, you can find their social links below or in the lower thirds. And I want to hear what all of you thought of episode 2 of House of the Dragon. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. We're happy to have you. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Arryk.